Is it really possible? Why? For what reason did this woman die? There are few concepts as disturbing as narcissistic love. It transforms a person who we are told we can depend on, who loves us and who we can love in return, into a monster who is only out for themselves and is twisting you to serve their own ends. And there are very few stories that give us greater insight into the mind of the narcissist as Dostoevsky's The Meek One. The tale follows a pawnbroker who marries and slowly mentally tortures a young woman until one day she breaks, ending her own life. The novel is written in the first person and is the ramblings of the pawnbroker as he tries to make sense of why his wife has done this. And it is gradually revealed to the reader that the blame lies solely with our humble narrator. Get ready to learn how to break a vulnerable young mind, why a wound to our egos can turn us unimaginably cruel, and how a self-centered approach to reality will inevitably collapse into despair and misery. Before we get started, I want to clarify that I'm using narcissism in a looser, non-clinical way. I make no psychiatric claims here, but there is no other term that captures the themes of the novel as well as this. So, let's peer into the mind of the narcissistic lover and see what qualities we recognize. 1. Manipulative kindness. It seems very strange to think of kindness as a bad thing. One of the first lessons we teach young children is to be kind to others, and it has been praised by everyone from early church fathers to Tibetan monks. So it is a testament to Dostoevsky's brilliance that he can highlight not the selfless and virtuous aspects of kindness, but rather how it can be used to manipulate and abuse. On the surface, much of the pawnbroker's behaviour is positively benevolent. Even before he and the young woman are engaged, he allows her to pawn items with him that no one else would accept, and even he would not accept under ordinary circumstances. His offer of marriage frees her from having to instead marry a physically abusive merchant. He even gifts money to her impoverished family. From the outside, he seems like a kind and devoted husband, but his true motives are hidden. He is using kindness not as a selfless means to help out the woman he loves, but instead as a way to gain power over her. He is attempting to secure her devotion and her love through indebtedness, and we see this backhandedness in every one of his so-called kind actions. When he is letting her pawn her pitiful pledges, he says, "I am only doing this for you. The other pawnbrokers would not take a thing like this from you." While he paints his proposal to her as genuine, he ultimately sees it as something that she should be grateful for, referring to himself as her liberator, and taking great offence when she delays answering him, as he sees it as refusing his magnanimity. Sure, he helps her family out, but then he attempts to cut them out of their new life together completely, further isolating his bride from any other avenues of love or companionship. Each of his good deeds is carefully calculated to place him above her, and to exacerbate her debt to him. As he puts it, "That fascinated me, this sense of inequality. It was very sweet." He ultimately uses this perceived indebtedness to justify a moral entitlement to her obedience and her unconditional love. At various points in the story, he reminds himself of all the kindness that he has shown her in order to stir up his own resentful feelings. He even nurtures a sense of personal outrage at her suicide, believing it is selfish of her to deprive him of her presence after all he has done for her. He almost takes a sick gratification in painting himself this way. He is the saintly, selfless man who dotes on an ungrateful, unappreciative and egoistic wife, who will not do the proper thing and worship him for all his kindness. He even identifies her as particularly susceptible to this sort of moral demands due to her meek and kind nature. When she shows brief flashes of pride and courage, that only makes conquering her spirit more attractive to the pawnbroker. And in writing the narrator like this, Dostoevsky illustrates a way that some people use kindness, not as something to be freely given or for the benefit of the receiver, but rather as a means for maintaining power over someone else in their hour of need. The young woman could hardly refuse the extra money given to her or the offer of marriage because the alternative would be much worse. Either destitute or wed to a shopkeeper who beat his last 2 wives to death. True to his profession, the pawnbroker sees someone who is at their lowest, in need of help and at the mercy of others, and loans them his kindness at a steep rate of interest. Sure, he will protect her from the elements and from poverty, but in return, he wants to own her very soul. In his own words, "I then looked upon her as mine, and did not doubt my power." And I love this as a theme because it is something that is so rarely touched upon in fiction, and yet we see it all the time in real life. The loan sharks of compassion can normally be found swimming around someone who has fallen on hard times. I'm sure you have known friends who are perfectly willing to help you, but will demand constant acknowledgement of that help, shaming you for ever needing it, and reminding you of this favour whenever they want something from you. This is kindness as economics, and it's something that is perfectly commonplace, yet seems to escape our attention most of the time. But let's go into a little bit more detail about what the pawnbroker actually wants from his young wife. What is all of this power over her for? Well, it turns out the answer is as selfish as it is worryingly familiar. If you want to help me make more videos like this, then consider subscribing to either my email list or my Patreon. The links are in the description. 2. Love and the ego. Erich Fromm famously wrote that what we often call love is instead selfish attachment. This idea has been echoed by Buddhist thinkers, Christian theologians, and psychoanalysts. True love is often painted as genuinely altruistic, a matter of wanting the best for someone else as a subject, with their own view on reality, wants, needs, and personality. Whereas attachment is using someone else for your own emotional ends. At its most extreme, this can manifest as outright physical abuse, where someone forces their partner to follow their will through violent threats. But it can also happen unconsciously, where we stay with someone not because we love them, but because we love what they are doing for us. Anecdotally, this often manifests as compensating for some insecurity, something we feel we lack but is made up for by the presence of our partner. Sure, we see ourselves as ugly, repulsive, and unworthy of love, but the presence of the affection of another helps allay these fears, even if we don't truly love them for who they are. And we see this tendency perfectly illustrated in Dostoevsky's tale. Midway through the book, it is revealed that the pawnbroker was once accused of cowardice, and as a result forced out of his military regiment. This experience filled him with a deep sense of shame at his own shortcomings, and he vividly describes the pain of swapping a celebrated military officer's uniform for the middle-class garb of a businessman. The pawnbroker has fallen into a relatively common situation. He has been forced to settle for a life that was not his first choice, and has turned into someone that he no longer respects. And he lets this eat away at him inside. His self-image seems to have never recovered from his act of cowardice and his expulsion from the military, and he craves something to plug this gaping hole in his ego. This is coupled with his shame at being a pawnbroker, which he knows is viewed as an avaricious and base profession. Looking around for something to rest his bruised self-esteem upon, he settles on this young woman, his new wife. Throughout the story, it becomes clear that what he wants, above all, is for his wife to worship him. He wants her to see him as all the things he wishes he was. When she first arrives at what is now their shared home, the pawnbroker deliberately treats her coldly and sternly. He stubbornly refuses to show her any warmth or tender love, and holds her at arm's length. At first, his motives for doing this are mysterious. Why would he ignore the very person he was so keen on making his? But it soon becomes clear. He is breaking her spirit by denying her the emotional basis of a relationship, and making her work for it piece by piece instead. The narrator describes how his new wife throws herself at him, showers him with affection, and he seems to enjoy the process of turning her down, seeing the disappointment form on her face as she realizes she should have no expectation of joy in this marriage. He berates her for her foolish youth and flaunts all the qualities he knows she hates, just to hammer home how miserable her life is to be with him, and just how at his mercy she truly is. At points, it's almost like he wants to see how far he can push her before she breaks. What can he make her endure without her ceasing to devote herself to him? Of course, it is this very attitude that causes any hope of love or happiness in their marriage to die, as she is solely filled with hatred and resentment at her peculiar husband. And it all sounds so ridiculous until you realise that what the pawnbroker wants is not the love of an equal, but worship and validation. What he wants is for someone to respect and venerate him despite all his flaws and whatever viciousness he inflicts upon them. This is part of why he conspires to have so much power over his wife. The more she relies on him, the more she is forced to adore and accept him no matter what. Of course, the ultimate irony in this is that she cannot give him what he wants while he has such power over her. As Jean-Paul Sartre once pointed out, there is a big difference between love freely given and love painfully extracted from an unwilling participant. What most people truly desire from romance is not simply the actions of a loving partner, but for those actions to be willingly performed out of generous affection. In other words, we don't just want our lover to do certain things, we want them to do them. But this requires a certain confidence. It means that we must relinquish control or influence over someone to see what they would naturally want to do. Can they love us in the way that we desire, or can they learn to? As Martin Buber seemed to argue, what makes our relationships with other people so meaningful is that we are forging a connection with a free subject, not a reluctant object in our power. But the tattered ego of the pawnbroker means he never has the self-confidence to do this. He can only feel safe when he is in full control of his wife, and the prospect of relinquishing his power over her terrifies him. So his fear of her rejection has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because his constant exercise of control over his wife not only eventually turns her against him, but also means any affection she did show only occurred under compulsion. He has closed himself off from any genuine connection because of his tortured self-image. It is a disturbingly relatable tendency, and many of us have it to a certain extent, born as it is out of common insecurity. But Dostoevsky eviscerates it in this short tale, showing it not only leading us to cruelty, but also fundamentally self-defeating. But what is it that allows the pawnbroker to treat his wife like this? How can he live with himself having shown such cruelty to someone he professes to love? The answer to this is perhaps a little surprising, and reveals a very ugly human habit that we would all benefit from noting, myself very much included. 3. Justification by suffering. A common saying is, hurt people, and I've seen this used in many different ways. People invoke it to describe how those who have been abused in the past are more likely to mimic those patterns of behaviour and become abusers in the future. Or just how someone going through a difficult time will often become overwhelmed and lash out at those closest to them. But in his short tale, Dostoevsky demonstrates how people can use the hurt that they have suffered, not just to make other people miserable, but to justify their misdeeds through the veil of victimization. It is a line of thinking we can all potentially fall prey to, but one that paves the road to despair, both for the people around us and for ourselves. In a throwaway line, the pawnbroker admits that he wants to take revenge on life for all it has done to him. This is spoken near the beginning of the story, but its true meaning only becomes clear later. The pawnbroker is so wounded by his expulsion from the regiment and the 3 years of suffering and poverty that followed it, that he is incapable of seeing himself as anything other than a wronged victim, even when this is evidently not the case. And unsurprisingly, this comes out most starkly in his relationship with his wife. Even when he holds all the cards and she is effectively at his mercy, he still perceives himself to be ruled by her whims. Whether today she will support his crumbling ego or ignore him and bash it to pieces. As he puts it, she was the unbearable tyrant of my soul and my tormentor. In each situation, he perceives himself as simply not capable of doing any wrong, but as forever on the receiving end of an unjust world. After all, how could someone who has suffered so much be not the victim of a crime, but its perpetrator? He decries that his life is cursed, and this becomes yet another self-fulfilling prophecy. Deprived of any warmth or affection, his wife strikes up a friendship with a local officer. And even though she remains faithful to him, the pawnbroker takes this as yet another example of the universe conspiring against him. He even takes out his revolver and places it in front of his wife, a clear insinuation that he is thinking of murdering her. He then becomes shocked when she in turn contemplates killing him, and when from this moment she becomes cold and stern with him, giving up her previous attempts to earn his tenderness. He refuses to take any responsibility for how his actions have crafted the world he lives in, and instead takes every new misfortune as evidence of his unique persecution, rather than the clear result of his own decisions. Then, perceiving himself as victimized anew, he uses this as justification for his next act of spite, only trapping him further in this vicious cycle. Much like another of Dostoevsky's anti-heroic protagonists, the underground man, the pawnbroker is trapped in a pointless rebellion against the world, vindicated by his own bad experiences. "Look at me," he cries amidst the tatters of his life. "I am a good person, devastated by the cruel winds of fate." He complains endlessly, even while he sabotages his own happiness by pushing away the very object of his desire. And I think there is a lot of relevant insight here. When we are at our lowest, it is very tempting to use this as a flimsy justification for attacking the world and everyone in it, taking revenge on them for tormenting us, and losing sight of where we are the cause of our own suffering. I'm sure we've all met people who are trapped in a spiral of self-destruction because they are blind to how their own actions are ruining their chances of a happy life. Just like our pawnbroker, they have had a series of bad experiences that they let poison their soul, and they learn to attribute every negative event in their lives to powerful external forces, because the truth is much more painful. That they have destroyed themselves simply to maintain their status as the sufferer, the victim of universal unfairness. Perhaps some of us have even been this person. I know I have. It is a very easy path to go down, to relieve all the burdens of power and responsibility, and to view ourselves as a helpless leaf carried on by the current of fate. Dostoevsky really nails the message that the world in and of itself simply isn't fair or just. There is pointless suffering and endless potential misfortunes. This is seen both in the young revolutionary Dostoevsky and the older religious conservative one. But if we let this fact poison us against life, against our fellow man, then we will only make our situation worse. And soon we will end up alone, isolated, having tormented everyone around us into leaving. At such a point, is it really surprising that people deny their own agency? Fleeing from the terrible realization that the person who has made their life a living hell is staring back at them from the depths of the mirror. But we have yet to see the most tragic portion of the narcissist's fate, and that is just our final point. 4. The fate of the narcissist. Perhaps the most heartbreaking pages of this short story are towards the end, where the pawnbroker realizes he has fully alienated his wife, who he discovers he is totally emotionally dependent on, and he panics to make things right again. Even this discovery is tinged with his egoism. It is sparked when he catches his wife singing to herself in the house, and realizes that she doesn't even notice if he's there anymore, since she would only ever sing when he was out. This makes him fly into a frenzy. Whereas before she was reacting to him, and everything she did, for good or for ill, was a response to his behaviour. Now she has detached herself emotionally from his actions, and is reclaiming her independence piece by piece. This sends the pawnbroker into total madness, as all at once it dawns on him that his very self-conception is only kept alive by the presence and entrapment of this person, and if he loses his grip over her mind, he will be totally lost. So, in a last-ditch effort to win her back, he throws himself at her feet, worshipping the ground she walks upon and saying that he will do anything for her. He professes his undying love and showers her with sudden affection. This change completely terrifies his wife. From her perspective, he has not shown her a single shred of love over the course of their entire marriage, and she has just begun to grudgingly accept this fact, even turning down a potential affair when it was offered. The previous months they had barely spoken, slept in separate beds, and were effectively cohabiting strangers. So to now face an onslaught of romance takes the wife completely off guard. In her panic, she shouts, "I thought you were going to leave me like this." That is, she thought that she and the pawnbroker would live the rest of their lives as they had been doing so for months, married in name only, until they each passed away. And she had at last accepted this fact, and begun to find happiness again. The pawnbroker was now nothing to her. Where she once sought his affection and wanted to do anything to break the deafening silence of their marriage, her only desire now is estrangement, and she burns with shame at the prospect of being fully his wife again. The pawnbroker thinks that this is just a matter of her getting used to a new status quo, and that he will soon take them on a romantic trip that will bring them close together. He does not know it is already too late. He returns home one day to find that his wife had jumped from the window of their house to her death. She had become so broken by their relationship, so emaciated by stress, that she almost resembled a skeleton in her coffin, and only a tablespoon's worth of blood was produced when she hit the floor. The pawnbroker is shattered by his wife's death, and he paces around her coffin, knowing that they will soon take her away to be buried. He wonders how he could possibly go on, when it suddenly hits him that he was the person that caused his wife so much pain. It was he who drove her to this. He who thought only of himself for their entire marriage, who extracted her affection through emotional neglect, and who wielded every kind action like a weapon. Confronted with the prospect of a life with the pawnbroker, his wife took what she saw as the easier path. And if we put morality aside for a second, there is something deeply tragic about both characters in this story. On the one hand, we have a young woman initially described as kind and caring who is driven to suicide by a narcissistic relationship. And on the other, we have a man who seemed genuinely unaware at how his actions were chipping away at the psyche of his wife, until finally she could take it no longer. And it is only at this moment he realizes everything that he has done to her, and also that he cannot bear to be without her. This is part of what makes Dostoevsky such a brilliant author. On a casual reading, the pawnbroker comes off as a totally malevolent force, doing everything he can to drive his wife to misery and then feigning surprise when she takes her own life. But on closer inspection, we see a very different kind of narcissism emerge. Instead of being malignant, the pawnbroker comes off as selfishly ignorant of how his actions affect others. It is not that he hates his wife, but rather that he can't bring himself to empathize with her. He is condemned to focus on himself to the exclusion of all others, so enraptured by his own deficiencies that he will plug his psychological wounds with whatever's to hand, be it a vain quest to rescue a dying marriage, or a wish to conquer and dominate the very woman he professes to love. The pawnbroker is damned to egoism, and rather than grant him joy or peace, all this does is consume every inch of happiness in his life. He is a mess of contradictions. Someone so self-important that they don't care about anyone else's feelings, yet so insecure that they cannot live without the validation of another. Someone who longs to be loved freely for his own character, but cannot bear to be vulnerable. Someone who looks upon other people with contempt, yet sees themselves as the least worthy of the lot. And while at first this might seem like a confusing characterization, it is a wonderful exposition of what many people with self-obsessive tendencies become. They appear from the outside as self-aggrandizing, viewing themselves as the center of reality. But this is often a response to deeply embedded insecurity. They cannot bear to face the truth, so they retreat into a comforting illusion that they are so much better than everyone else. But it is in the quiet moments of the night, where they have no one to prop up their rotting egos, that they stare existence in the face and realize that they hated themselves all along. I think many of us are prone to this sort of thinking, to a greater or lesser extent. It is so easy to turn to superficial arrogance when deep down we are in terrible pain. But Dostoevsky demonstrates where such a path will eventually lead. Alone, abandoned, and grieving, having only realized too late that we will never get the connection we seek from domination, but only from the tender embrace of someone that freely wants us. The pawnbroker is a wonderful demonstration of the gentle narcissism that can arise in any of us, and how it can tear us apart before we even notice it's there. Blinding ourselves to our own darker qualities won't make them go away, but it will prevent us from stopping them in their tracks. It's a truly terrifying thought, but one that I think is worth paying attention to. As always, I encourage you to read this story for yourselves to get your own interpretation of it. There's been so much I haven't been able to touch on here. And if you want more on this dastardly yet scarily relatable sort of character, then check out this video to look at The Underground Man, Dostoevsky's portrait of a self-destructive nihilist. And stick around for more on thinking to improve your life.